The invasion came from beyond the moon, and as we understand it, was one of the most devastating moments of human history, worse than any war that came before it, from the 100 Years, the Napoleonic, all 4 world wars, or the Moon War of 2054, and the after effects can still be felt to this day. With overwhelming firepower and the element of surprise, it didn't take long for the aliens to conquer Earth. There was resistance, of course, but much like a bug, it was inconsequentially squished out. Only one group was known to have made a dent in the alien forces on the side of humanity, the Xcom group. It is said that they were the best chance to save the world during the initial invasion. Unfortunately, their victories were short-lived because their commander got captured. That one setback led to defeat after defeat, as we now understand that the aliens probed, hopefully just, the commander's mind, and stole our best tactics to use against humanity. With human forces thoroughly crushed, a new world order rose, the Advent. They kept order as the aliens quickly cemented their power. Although the remaining humans were allowed to live, what they experienced in those years could hardly be classified as free. It took 20 years for humankind to start to fight back properly, starting with the exact same event that cemented our defeat: kidnapping the commander. After the chessboard had all the pieces to start the match, it was quickly decided that a message had to be made against the alien oppressors. Not much is known about the first counterattack. Information about the mission and the participants are lost to the annals of time. But with the help of hindsight, the historical interpreted narrative device for strategic intelligence and global history transmission, we can accurately recreate history using the historian-verified data we have at hand, and the super internet to accurately and precisely fill in the blanks so perfectly that you and the countless advanced level college history classes that will be taught of this material will think that you're really there in the moment. Yes. Well, unless there was some temporal anomaly that caused humans to develop rubber bones and wings in the olden times, I think we need to speak to Kevin in IT about what happened here. Still, we persevere for now. The mission was a simple one: to sneak in and send a message. The message was to be delivered in a special envelope attached to a propagandist statue. But like most things in history, we wouldn't be talking about it if it had not gone awry. The humans were discovered far too easily. According to documentation, the team was made up of only rookies, as the main force was busy preparing elsewhere for what came next. A firefight quickly broke out. There are no listed casualties, so we can assume that the mission was pulled off without much issue. The message of a pound of C4 was received very clearly, and the match between humanity's last hope, Xcom, and Advent had begun. With the commander secured, Xcom quickly returned to their base, the flying helicarrier, the Avenger, named for the initiative that fought off the initial attack, at the cost of Earth's mightiest heroes. The aliens by this point controlled 98% of the Earth's surface, minus a few shantytowns that existed outside their megastructures, and a small diner that they had left as neutral ground as their burgers were so good it would be wrong to deny even the resistance of them. Although there were likely vast teams that manned the Avenger, only a few names are still known. Even one of the leaders' names fell to the sands of time, left with only his moniker of Central to the future generations to learn about. It is a strange thing his name was erased, as by all accounts, he was the ears of the operation. Central's role was recon, from contacting resistance factions to procuring data of future combat sites. Unlike his name, not much would be hidden as long as he was around. After the initial Xcom initiative fell, the original chief scientist went missing, presumed mad. We will get to her story later. For the new head of science, Xcom managed to get the former Advent scientist and possible willingly ignorant cannibal, according to the profile, Richard Teigen. Teigen had removed the compliance chip that the aliens installed into all non-alien personnel through rather extreme measures. The first documented case of self-trepanning in nearly 100 years. Remember this chip, it will come up later. There is an argument to be made that removing the chip caused minor brain damage, as brilliant as he was. His ability to feel emotions was limited, and willingness to rip apart an alien heightened compared to before the defection. Xcom took these new quirks as a full recommendation. Heading up the engineering facility, either through lack of personnel, skill, or the more likely cause, nepotism, was the daughter of the former chief, Lily Chen. Raymond would not appear again, although there are tales of him creating a rogue AI that XCOM would use to later gain schematics for quite a devastating tool. Alas, either through record corruption or glitches due to adding programs to make the hindsight work, those files are lost. To combat the nepotism, Lily would develop a deep need to please her father, thus becoming an exceptional engineer in her own right. Being able to maintain the Avenger and develop dangerous and hilarious new technology without a second thought. Without an army, these three would not last long. In the early days, the Resistance would not have much personnel, but the A-Team would be the best of the best that humanity could offer. The first recorded mission that the commander directly controlled was to sabotage a psionic transmitter. Although not vital to the mission as a whole, this would become a great point to introduce the first members of the A-Team. There were few forces in the pre-war world as terrifyingly organized as the Yakuza. One area of Japan in particular was well documented as a place of high activity, which is probably why Kamurocho was one of the first locations the aliens attacked. Unfortunately for the city, the strongest among them, the Dragon Protector, was absent during the invasion and the destruction of the city. It is said the battle only lasted hours, but the fight took days and would go down in legends, even in the aliens' histories books. One survivor of the massacre and subject of this particular case file was the apparent loan shark, well known for his fighting skills and speed with his legs. With his billions of yen on fire and worthless in the New World, Akiyama chose to stand up to the alien menace rather than submit to a way of life without freedom and choice. It is said that if you go near the ruins of what was formerly Kamurocho, you can hear the dragon's famous cries of anguish in the wind. A veteran of 74 wars in the span of 50 years, known for eating snakes and giving liberty to guns, there isn't a recorded or unrecorded war without mention of this covert agent. He has had many codenames, from Naked to Solid, even Big Boss. It is strange, however, that despite his age and stories of his various points of life, that this agent seems to have reversed aging at the cost of his memories. With his understanding of various tools, he made the perfect agent on the field. Although his dislike of large robots, which he would call Metal Gears, did lead to a limit to the roles he could be assigned. He didn't remember much from before the invasion, only that he has been chosen to defend man under the name Big Hoss. Whatever his backstory was, we were lucky to have him in the war efforts. An agent with even less history than Snake himself. When you hear the name Linkle, you are reminded of the legendary Hero of Time or the Princess of Hyrule, which our records show was destroyed early in the invasion. It is said that the hero could reincarnate due to an ancient curse, or something like that. Highly unscientific, and only the heretics of the Temple of the Triforce continue to try to decipher the text of the ancient one, Nintendo. Or side story of said tale was a master marksman, who in another time might have been known as the hero of snipers. According to the files, she was very excitable and happy to help in any scenario. This eagerness would be her greatest strength and greatest failing. Finally, for now, known for his high intelligence and his strange bodily shape, the colleagues of the XCOM Initiative devised a quite accurate, if cruel, moniker for this individual. Eggman was a skilled operative in the field, and possibly a true threat to the aliens in his rebellion. The beings from space were well known for using propaganda against the rebellion, and whether fluke or due to his prowess in the field, Eggman had a lot of stories told about himself, seemingly showing his brains, but also his ineptitude. Known in the media for battling a small rodent understood to be incredibly fast, Eggman would rarely win, and if he did, it would be taken away from him very quickly. A clever diversion from the front lines. Historians have debated whether this series is one of the best cases for the later anthropomorphic humans that would surface around the world, collectively known in that time as furries. Although with very little in common and not much in the way of cohesion, the four made their mark in Advent's books that day, slowly taking out network uplinks and the forces of Advent. The aliens, of course, have used 20 years in power to upgrade themselves. The Sectoids, for example, have mastered the power of the Necronomicon, managing to bring back the dead as Deadites, and controlling them through their psionic abilities. Thankfully, Solid Snake has seen his share of crazy monsters and had the perfect solution for the problem. Akiyama, on the other hand, was slightly too overzealous. and sustained injuries in the line of duty. But still, with the first recorded mission a success, the forces of XCOM were charged and ready for the missions ahead. With the facilities truly underway, the XCOM initiative would attempt to take some time to relax. Fortunately for the textbooks, not everyone believed in the need for recovery time. Outside of XCOM and Advent, there were records of other factions that would be vital to the fight. The first contact came soon after XCOM's first major mission. A leader of the factions known as the Skirmishers, named for their lack of ability to deal with more than one conflict at a time, reached out to XCOM to negotiate a ceasefire between themselves and another faction, the Ravagers. If XCOM could help them to get along, they would become very useful allies. This would require a two-tier mission, and thus the A-team was split. With Akiyama still injured from his last run-in, other arrangements were required. Every main squad needs a backup team to give them the chance to recover, and the squad known as the Power Rangers were the perfect group to back up the A-team. Their stories were well documented in the American sphere, especially around the Angel Grove region. It is said their machines held off the first wave, giving citizens the chance to escape. It's thanks to them that we had a rebellion faction at all in the North American area. Unfortunately, the Megazord, as it was known, suffered catastrophic damage and became unable to function. That, as well as their leader Zordon's destruction, left the morphing grid that they used to fight evil only able to allow them to use their outfits. Thankfully, the aliens also did take out Rita Repulsa's Moon Palace, allowing this war not to be split three ways. It's understood that Alpha still lives, but will not leave the lookout until Zordon comes back online. Unfortunately, humanity could not wait for the ghosts to be resurrected, and so the Rangers joined XCOM to help with the fight ahead. It was decided that the forces would be split, Eggman and Snake protecting the Skirmisher to the rendezvous, while Lincoln and the Pink Power Ranger would protect the Ravagers. They met at Neutral Ground, a city inhabited by nothing but radioactive zombies. These cities fell to the devastation of the aliens' initial attacks, and proved their lack of care or empathy to human life, transforming such land to barren waste to dump their alien excess, leading to the true question that has baffled scholars for years since: do lost husks dream of radioactive sheep? Thankfully, regardless of sleep, the Lost had all the resistance of paper, allowing the team to remove them from the board with ease and precision. Whereas the Skirmishers were humans living at the edge of civilization, the Ravagers were ex-Advent, who had realized that the Elders were not allies to anyone, and had split from Advent to oppose the aliens, hoping to free more Advent in the future. Of course, them looking like Advent soldiers did nothing for their trustworthiness to the rest of humanity. The Ravagers' side was met with other Advent forces, the secret team designed to deal with the Lost. Records show that they were not successful. XCOM and the Ravager, known as Mox, took them down quickly enough. Like the legendary but now extinct creature known as the Intern, their loss did not alert Advent in any way. Thankfully, both parties were excellent fighters, and managed to get through the city with little more than a scratch. There is an irony noted in the reports that it is likely that without the intervention of humanity's greatest challenge, the Chosen, the treaty that was to be created would never have come to be. With both sides increasing in hostility, it was only the arrival of a being known as the Assassin that would necessitate a very quick change in attitude. A being that by all reports had been human, but it chose to give up their humanity for a truly dangerous increase in power, speed, power, destructive weaponry, and of course power. If it was just these, then they would have been formidable by themselves. It was the individual skills that made them a true terror for the Resistance. The Assassin, as records teach us, could teleport, turn invisible, and most dangerous of all, was immune to Overwatch attacks. This made them a nightmare to take out, and a frequent dine and dasher as per Advent records, showing that although they fought for the Elders, the Chosen saw themselves above the war. Still, with the combined might of Eggman and the Pink Power Ranger, the Assassin was forced into a retreat, but not without alerting every zombie the city had to offer. Minor damage was caused to the soldiers in the retreat, but would pale in comparison to the Assassin's final act: kidnapping Mox the Ravager. Thankfully for the XCOM initiative, they had already received the signature on the treaty, forcing the other factions into an alliance. It is argued that in their attack, a mutual hatred of the Chosen formed a bond that could not be undone until the great and mysterious Skirmisher X brought anger upon his kind by stealing the royal pudding from the Canadians years after the war ended. While the fighters were away, the scientists would play. Tigan had made strides in working out what they were using the commander for. According to the notes of the research, the Elders had been feeding combat scenarios into the commander's brain, using them to plan out tactics of Advent forces and unwillingly causing the subjugation of humanity through the eyes of defending it. It is hypothesized that this is why the commander seemed to be able to make the war dance as he demanded once freed, and why the elders especially were desperate to reclaim the commander. Of course, being separated from the Link, the task of sending orders fell to another they had captured. Not much is known about this new person relaying orders. However, it has been argued that due to the events that would follow, their backup was at least somewhat related to one Ralph Wiggum. To make strides into taking down Advent, the Xcom forces would be required to schooljack an Advent officer. According to the records, this matter would be painless and cause a harmless blackout for the victim in an ethical, safe, and gentle knockout as possible. Later analysis of the skulls of anyone schooljacked would argue otherwise. We will return to this matter later. It wasn't long before Advent decided to hit back at Xcom where it hurt. During a check-in at an Allied camp, Advent launched an assault on the village, showing that there was nowhere on the planet that the Resistance could hide. An argument could be made that they had attacked far too early though, as at this point, Xcom hadn't even tried to make an official contact with the settlement. Xcom was only calling in the moment to see if anyone was around to actually make contact, according to the reports. Still, being within radio communication range meant that the human resistance could not ignore the cries for help, sending in an assault team to pacify the alien menace. The warriors in question were fairly battle-hardened by this point, and so the battle started to sway in XCOM's favour quickly enough. It is a question whether the lack of training or the brainwashing was the reason why the Advent soldiers were so incompetent. However, it made for a simple fight. Old texts referred to their abilities as Stormtrooper aim, though it did fail to explain that term's definition, albeit many villagers did die due to XCOM not landing close enough to the people actually in trouble. But in truth, using the information Advent had taken from the now free commander, it turned out they had a secret plan. Due to the complete restructuring of calendars and time from the alien invasion, we are still trying to piece together what came before and during the invasion. This has led to some interesting questions forming. Such in the case of the Mudmen, the aliens used these for infiltration and eradication of the resistance cells, literal sleeper agents that can mutate and attack at any moment. They caused plenty of trouble for XCOM operatives. The main point of contention is that we do not know if these predated the fictional series of Batman. This had led to two opposing hypotheses. On the one hand, if the invasion predates the series, it would be interesting for Advent to create an adversary known as Clayface for the human resistance known as Batman to fight, as this could cause resistance against aliens to grow more. On the other hand, if the series predates the invasion, there is a chance that the aliens took the concept of Clayface and used it in the corruption of their DNA of these new weapons. However unlikely this may be, a later enemy would also seem to take inspiration from the series, as this creature would look suspiciously like one Dr. Freeze. Historians continue to argue the accuracy of these claims, but most can agree that it is an odd coincidence, which either way brings up further questions unanswerable due to the ravages of time. Thankfully, these Mudmen could not take bullets as well as their clay forms would suggest. It did not take long for XCOM to push back the attackers. With the awkward introduction phase counteracted by Advent's attacks, negotiation between resistant factions and XCOM became much easier. This became known as the destructive wingman strategy in both business negotiations and dating. It was around this time that the shadowy organization who was funding XCOM came to the initiative with a new, most pressing issue, whereas we now know the scope and the scale of the Avatar project. As part of the report, we have to fill in the blanks when they come up. At this time, nothing was known about the project other than its name, and that whatever it was seemed to be the end goal for the Advent. Discovering and stopping this project would become central to XCOM's work, and in time would be the catalyst to the world as we know it today. It is said that the Avatar project shelved a lot of other projects, such as Operation Season's Beatings, where Advent tried to capture Santa and use his form as a disguise to sneak into dangerous individuals' houses. The plan was shelved after no alien could keep up with the sleigh, not even in their spacecraft. The first mission would be to raid a Blacksite to gain new information into the aliens' plans. Before heading to the Blacksite, XCOM took the time to firmly plant its feet into the ground. From meeting new resistance cells, slowly increasing their power through research and target practice, and using resources from newly treated factions, launch a rescue operation to recover Mox.
Firebrand is in position and the compound is on full alert. Time to move.
We've been spotted.
Emotions were running high as victory after victory came, although there were plenty of unnamed deaths in the war. At this time, the A-Team continued to go from strength to strength. Advent wouldn't waste any time, however, employing other forces such as the Snakes. No one is entirely sure why they originally came to us in the form of the Thin Men, nor how a creature such as this fit inside one of those suits, nor what benefit it provided, seeing as they worked under a shoot first, disguise themselves later mentality. It is known that the Snake Toys were closely related to the Boa Constrictor, which does add additional questions as to the genetic similarities of Earth and space creatures. While XCOM would fear their death-like grip, for the non-combatants living among the humans, a certain industry would form around their vice they could bestow that is still prevalent today. It was incredibly successful. Around this time, the second of the Chosen would make their appearance. Not much is known about the Hunter, other than his thirst for battle and childlike love of the destruction his new power caused. A sniper by trade, his weapons had the power to pierce anything without destroying it, so long as the shot hit its target. A simple countermove was to exit the field of the scope's vision before the shot could connect. Of all the Chosen, the Hunter had the biggest ego and the weakest powers there. XCOM would continue to recruit new allies, expand their base, and decimate the alien forces. Everything seemed to be going well, too well. The raid on the Blacksite would see the first major challenge to that confidence. The first big counterattack came when XCOM finally found the Blacksite and began an operation to retrieve the information from within. With only basic weapons and armor and no intel on what was coming their way, the Resistance had to make up for their lack of technological advantages through raw skill and had to send the best of their best. Led by Captain Akiyama, the squad consisting of Eggman, Linkle, and Snake. Named Operation No Nonsense, it would not live up to its name. The operation was fairly simple. With the units under cover, infiltrating was no major issue. But as expected, it was clear the base was heavily fortified with turrets. Advent had increased their numbers with the re-emergence of XCOM. It was clear from first entry that this facility was where they were taking humans, who until this point were just pictures on milk cartons. Why they were being taken would take a while to learn, but one mystery had been ticked. Disaster struck once it became impossible to keep up stealth.
They're onto us. You see that?
Deciding it was better to bring down the enemy numbers rather than be encircled within, once they retrieved the enemy data, the squad opened fire. The Resistance had anticipated the firepower of the Advent forces. Unfortunately, whether due to fate's cruel hand or the whims of the almighty turtle, the attack came at the same time as an inspection of the facility by the assassin of the aliens. The logs do not state as such, but it would be reasonable to assume, with all the data we have now, that the creature was very pleased about the ordeal, changing a boring inspection into a bloodbath fairly quickly.
They won't last long at this rate.
The battle continued inside as both sides used ambush after ambush. It is reported that much like the game of Othello, neither side truly had an advantage that the other side couldn't find their way into exploiting. XCOM was met by the newest advancement in Advent technology, the mech. Using the chip, Advent forces would send their consciousness to the machine, allowing for deep diving and fighting from afar without the threat of death. It is worth noting that after examining the technology and training manual, that the Advent forces were uninformed about the danger of using this link. Advent took their designs from an ancient historical documentary named Sword Art Online. The neural headset would cause death upon the mech's demise. Advent would send various emails about this glitch. It should be noted that an email chain from higher up noted the error, but created countless charts demonstrating that fixing the problem would cost so much more than simply training new soldiers, and that it went against what we can only assume is a religion amongst the Advent, the shareholding values. Alas, not much has changed since then. The sight of the item that they came to receive caused a lapse in judgment as the forces charged the facility, right into the hands of the assassin and Advent.
Immersed in the power.
Thankfully, Eggman was far away from the attack and managed to revive 2 operatives, but could not defend Linkle, who after a snakeoid grabbed her and faced the hot, sweaty forces of Advent, was the first true casualty of the A-Team's war.
No!
There aren't many notes after this moment. It could be due to loss of information, but it is likely that the forces were so shell-shocked by this moment that the remainder of the battle was a daze in their mind. It took time and effort, but the assassin was pushed back and the data was retrieved. Advent did everything they could to stop the operation, from summoning more forces to bring their Psi warriors. Xcom would push back, taking damage, getting stopped, but they fought on. And at last, with sadness in their hearts, an objective in hand, the forces left the body of their earliest sniper to join the cause. A note from the Avenger that came from all of this notes the lack of preparation for such a difficult operation, and to make sure that any big such event would only be conducted once adequate upgrades were in place. Things went quiet in the records for a while here. We can assume that whereas daily battles were occurring between the 2 forces, ground was not being won or lost. In the internal logs, we can see that this is a time of great research and building for Xcom. With the Proving Ground, they were able to create new technology, including the Skulljacker. After a few missions, the skirmisher finally felt comfortable to wear regular clothes. An adventurer and an all-round badass, Lara became a skirmisher after the aliens destroyed her mansion. Well, most of her mansion. Reports state that the freezer was reinforced and survived. When questioned about it, the Xcom psychiatrist stated that rather than deal with it, Lara would just demand not to open the door and not to let it out. With all the artifacts and adventures to her name, it was decided that anything that brought Lara Croft that level of PTSD would probably be best to remain sealed, at least until the war was over. Fast, nimble, and able to get anywhere undetected, but with the ability to decimate any room she found herself in, Lara would become a perfect fit for the skirmisher lifestyle. This adventurer had a lot of experience under her belt, from uncovering Atlantis to fighting undead and dinosaurs. Not much the aliens could throw at her would shock Lara. Realistically, we are lucky for her pre-war adventures. If the aliens had gotten control of a T-Rex, the future of Xcom might have looked a lot more bleak. With the death of Linkle, a slot was open for an expert marksman who had seen the dark realities of war. So how they got a teenager who was pro with a bow is a little mysterious. But according to sources, Yukari Takeba was no novice in the field of battle, which in hindsight is quite worrying. A member of a fraternity named Seas. This group were once users of a strange skill known as Persona. Using this other self, she fought against strange creatures known as shadows in a tower that appeared in the hour between 12 and 12:01. Now, if like me, none of this sounds familiar, that's because this battle is not one generally known to the public. Only a select few could interact with this midnight hour, and as far as we could tell, one of them was a dog. Still, stranger things have happened. Who doesn't remember the demon uprising? Or when all the ghosts came back while the afterlife was going through renovations? Still, there is a history of leaving the fate of man in the hands of teenagers. So it is not unprecedented that Xcom would hire Yukari to be a marksman. She would become an indispensable member to the team, with frighteningly accurate shots. When asked what her secret was, she would smile, look wistfully into the distance, and said she had a lot of practice with firearms, and that an unknown entity, EO, guides her. Reports would state operatives would be nervous by the look and intensity she would give any pistol she was given. During a routine covert operation, disaster struck. The Pink Power Ranger, Snake, and a rookie, who hadn't been given a designation at the time, were ambushed by Advent and the Lost. Not much is known about the operation, as this fire was partially destroyed by one of Dr. Chen's gremlins going haywire. All that is known is that in their escape, surrounded by enemies, the rookie made a bold and noble sacrifice, allowing for the other 2 members to escape. Although their name and face were lost to time and demonic creatures that should not be fed after midnight, we shall never forget your brave sacrifice, random rookie. You may not have known it, but in your death, you allowed 2 heroes to carry on for Earth's liberation. With another death and the Skulljacker made, The A-Team needed another win in the form of gaining further access to the neural network of the Advent forces through...
Moving to access!
We have complete access to the Advent psionic network. I have dedicated our systems to processing the new data.
Means. Scientifically, I will not say ghosts exist. However, when you involve the psionic network, glitches in the Matrix are entirely possible. Such is the case of the Codex. The amplified signal going through the psionic network, mixed with the consciousness of a genetically modified body, came together in a new form. No one is entirely sure exactly how this came to be, nor how long this entire process lasts. Tests after the war would lead to a brief period where companies would try to separate what was to be considered the soul and the body, known as the Soma endeavor, leading to the mind being able to do one task, while the body, using necromancy, would be left to do easier, more remedial work. This was seen as rather inhumane by all but the corporations who fought tooth and nail to get it passed. The matter only ended when it was agreed that the bill would be passed, so long as the CEOs were the first to go through the process. Surprisingly, they were less demanding upon that caveat appearing. For XCOM, the fact that these creatures could disable their guns, cause huge AoE explosions, and split themselves apart after getting hurt made for formidable enemies in this early stage of the war. When we look back at what survived of the old internet before the Great Revolution, we see certain things are true. The old world was a place where discourse about anything could happen. Cats were at the center of the ancient world, and no one knew how magnets worked. Thankfully, with the advancement in education, all of these previous beliefs are part of the past. The Unspeakable One believes all humans should not engage in petty squabbles. The cats were overthrown by the old ones, and due to extensive research by XCOM and modern scientists, we now know exactly how magnets work. And I could give you a lecture on magnetism. However, I am a historian, and as such, I will stick to my chosen subject. This tangent takes a long way to saying that during the Quiet Period, a lot of scientific breakthroughs took place, from better armor to the graphic learning of how alien body parts work. But none helped the cause quite like the advancements of the technology that magnets brought us. It would not be the last of their firepower growth, but it would be a strong start, allowing for a higher level of offensive capabilities. There were plenty of new foes met during this time, from the cyberspace clone creating Tron, to the alien who had been forced to watch children's TV until they burst into a murderous rage and released to XCOM, the Berserker. With the danger ramping up and injuries growing, XCOM did the sensible thing around this time. They sent more people to each mission. It is not clearly stated why they waited this long, or at all, to send 6 people instead of 4. With new weapons, new colleagues, and more intel, it seemed as though slowly the war was heading in their favor. New places open, new recruits joined the fight, or at least their logs start around this time. Data of this particular operative is slim, even by the standards we are currently dealing with since the Great Net War. Known as a hero to many and a menace to far more, not a single source can place what Gordon Freeman was doing prior to the rescue of the commander. We have records of his time in Black Mesa prior to the Resonant Cascade, the first true interaction with aliens humankind chose to sweep under the rug. There is also a possible involvement in the liberation and subsequent destruction of an Advent test city later. But no one can actually remember the exact moment he joined the XCOM initiative. Most records state that one day he was just in the facility, gearing up to fight aliens like he was always part of the fight. Records state that another man was occasionally seen nearby during Gordon's tenure, watching on with cold indifference. Not much is known about this other figure, other than them sharing a resemblance to the Thin Men from the beginning of the invasion, as there were no records of anyone actually getting close to this cryptic human.
The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world.
The other new operative is a bit harder to discuss, for we lack a name, only a job description, quite an insane look to go off. The Guardian was said to be a soaring eagle for the team. He does not appear in many of the records, but according to the files we do have, he was an ancient warrior trapped in endless fighting that somehow led him to this fight. Most surprising was that he was meant to have the head of a bird. Looking back at the data and at our current bird-humanless society, I question whether this is accurate. But the pre-war internet has scant imagery of what he was meant to look like. Personally, I believe that the bird helmet was some sort of accessory, for his headwear. However, without putting my prejudices into the system, this form is all the evidence we have on what this individual might have looked like. For saying there is no mention of him post-war, this Birdman might have been the last of his kind, destroyed by the aliens he fought against. The truth will continue to elude us on this fellow. During this time, to keep the Avatar project weakened, Xcom built their forces up. Regular attacks on facilities were required. While most were routine due to events within, we can finally return to talking about a previous matter of the Xcom initiative and the person Dr. Tygan would replace, Dr. Vahlen. One of the greatest minds of her generation, Dr. Vahlen was a key player in the original Xcom initiative, but when the commander was captured and the base destroyed, Vahlen and a select crew fled. While their exact whereabouts were unknown, the madness that she succumbed to was of legendary proportions. Already a little mad in the early days, quite vocally advocating for the ability to genetically modify humans, free from the shackles of morals, she would somehow manage to inadvertently create for Advent 3 super soldiers that would serve the aliens in some form or another in the battles ahead. These would be known as the Viper King, Berserker Queen, and the Archon King. Why or how Vahlen made these creatures is unknown. What that can be said is that she would end up a more superior and deadly Dr. Frankenstein. It is likely she suffered a similar fate for her efforts. While tearing off alien arms wasn't getting the results needed to hack the psionic network, Dr. Tygan managed to stop eating his precious Advent burgers long enough to create what would be known as the Shadow Chamber. By using the power of internet browsing, Xcom will be able to discover the secrets of the psionic network and indeed take one step closer to discovering the truth of the Avatar project. We aren't even sure how this one was even possible. All logic needs to be thrown out the window to even get them here. However, as the records state, this machine, who helped Xcom in many battles, was known as the Dreadnought. A creature that allegedly came from the year 40,000. Its appearance has led researchers down the path of desperately trying to disprove its existence. This is for 2 reasons. First and foremost, if this creature does exist, as per all documentation would have us believe, it is clear that time travel is not only possible, but has already happened. Secondly, and more worryingly, if it does exist, it spells a dark and hopeless time in humanity's future, one that we have plenty of documentation on, however would be relegated to the realm of fantasy if it wasn't for this one machine, a servant of the Emperor of Man. This machine is essentially a walking coffin, holding the body of a fallen or broken warrior in a sarcophagus, not even allowing death or dismemberment as a reason to retire from the battlefield. I am sure you can understand why we are desperate to disprove this as historical fact. No one knows exactly where this creature came from, but it is said that the original Dr. Shen did have something to do with its creation. It would serve mankind as it would in its horrifying past and our terrifying future. Using the power of the old modem that was down in the basement of the Avenger, Dr. Shen and Dr. Tygan were able to use the codex they stole to infiltrate the psionic network. Although it is noted that a failsafe built into the creature destroyed the Shadow Chamber after the dial-up reached critical mass, meeting the power of fiber optic internet. This led to receiving vast amount of data for Xcom to work through that would keep the coffee business in Hangar B flushed with many scientists and janitors as new work in glass sweeping was underway. With this information, Xcom learned the true nature of the Blacksite they visited long ago. Contained in the green vials was the DNA of thousands of humans. While Advent would open clinics to help humanity, at the same time, select people would be taken to the Blacksite to be melted down into goo. The remaining meat would make their way back to the local fast food chain to keep humans fed. This was called the Soylent Green Initiative by Advent, and the reason why you never saw Advent forces at the local McElders. The only question left that remained unanswered was an age-old one: why? With the war entering what would be classed as the later stages, Xcom's research of alien artifacts and seer bodies to be used as target practice finally came together in the best way. From the outset, Xcom's weapons were light years behind Advent, and it was only through training, stormtrooper aiming from their foes, and luck that victory was attained. But in this moment, the position shifted. With the invention of plasma technology, Xcom's weapons were at the same, if not a slightly more advanced level to Advent. The biggest problem Advent, and indeed anyone on top of the food chain, faces is complacency. With having the best technology, Advent would never feel the need to upgrade. Indeed, why would a lion need to innovate against an ant? But once the ants work together and form themselves into a working M1 Abrams tank, not learning how to grow will quickly become a crutch to the lion. I think my analogy got away from me somewhere in there, but you get the picture. Advent's armor was not ready to face their own or superior technology. That is why the weapons had been biolocked. But with the technological breakthrough, Advent would quickly learn what stagnation felt like. The first victim of these upgrades would be one of Xcom's biggest and oldest recurring foes. With the Assassin's base discovered, the A-Team assembled their best and deadliest for the mission. Eggman, Snake, Akiyama, Lara, the Pink Power Ranger, who had become the resident healer, and the Dreadnought. Truly, there was no team quite as deadly nor confusing for any Advent force to reckon with. It didn't take long for a firefight to break out, not that it would last long considering the upgrades in rifle and shotgun technology. According to the reports, initially the team had trouble finding a door into the facility. In the end, probably through memories of how Space Marines deal with locked rooms, the Dreadnought made other arrangements. This, of course, alerted the entire facility to Xcom's presence. Although, with the assassin having a polite conversation over tea and crumpets while the facility was stormed, it's slightly concerning that Advent were not alerted earlier. It's things like this that make me wonder what side the Chosen were truly on. Evidence says that they were ordered by the Elders to bring the commander back under Advent control, and the one that did it would rule the Earth when the Avatar project was completed. But it is hard to believe that they actually worked together side by side with Advent. From what data we can gather, the situation seemed closer to the old analogy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's hard to see any evidence of real unity between the parties, more a future ruler lording over their subjects. Of course, the other reason could be interference from one of the other Chosen. The competition between the three was notoriously bad. One game of rock, paper, scissors famously leveled Paris. It is ironic that had the three worked together, it is unlikely Xcom would have stood a chance. But much like the ending of the corporate wars that would follow, greed would be the thing to finally take down the giant robotic doom clown of the McDonald's empire. It is strange that during the initial part of the attack, the assassin was attempting to get Xcom to trust the Elders.
Would it be so hard to trust the Elders? To believe for an instant that they fight for more than just a single world? That humanity is not the center of this universe, but just a small part of a greater whole?
As a reminder, this alien was famously the first to attack and held no prisoners. But now in her home, she would instead ask humanity to put down their weapons and believe the Elders were a net good for humanity.
Your greatest minds struggle to grasp mere slivers of the Elders' knowledge. By now, they must see the futility in this conflict. The only way for your race to survive is to submit.
Which is the equivalent of smashing the bottle and then trying to put the genie back inside. As is easy to guess, Xcom did not listen to such statements, and slowly, with bodies piling up behind them, they made their way towards the inner chamber. Inside, they found the source of the Chosen's power, a wall. That's the way the records describe it. A large wall-like structure that was being sprayed with dark smoke. It probably was some kind of obelisk in all reality. The dark smoke likely some ancient psychic-based alien power. The problem when you deal with the military is they are not much in the way of being descriptive. They were far more concerned with how to destroy the giant obvious target that had appeared in front of them than examining it. What we might have learned from it if we could only have researched how it came to give the Chosen their immortality, or even possibly their power. Equally, giving any part of humanity immortality with the post-invasion future to come, it was probably best that Xcom chose a destroy first, figure out the consequences later approach to this device. Of course, standing between the device and the A-Team was the figure that they had come to take care of, the assassin, and her most loyal pawns. It was a drawn-out battle. Not only were the bit pieces annoying to take care of, but the assassin, on her own home turf, was nimble and agile, ducking and weaving through Xcom ranks, dodging fire and angry glares alike. But equally, the A-Team had been getting ready for this battle since their first meeting, the memory of Mox being taken continuing to push them to new heights. The loss of Linkle, a constant reminder of the threat this Chosen presented. And so they fought, everything on the line, and the future of a free humanity on their shoulders. The only note of war banter comes from Snake, who writes in his report that he couldn't confirm it, but from one interaction, the assassin might have been a fan of someone called Monty Python.
It is but a scratch.
The assassin would go down thanks to well-played shots from the Dreadnought, proving that ninja skills have no real defense against the Fist of the Emperor, an egg-shaped man and a teenager in a pink suit. The team would set their sights on the obelisk, attempting to take it down before the assassin would be revived at full power, and then would attempt to stop this, but would not be successful. Heavily wounded, and with little in the way of recovery, the assassin would revive, making their last stand. With one last heroic effort, Eggman fired a shot so precise that the only explanation for it that the ghosts of his fallen comrades was steadying his hand through it. A blast cut through the noise of the fight, as easily as it cut through the flesh of the assassin. Eggman finally brought them to their knees. Panic set in as Akiyama finished the fight. The reports state that the assassin chose to use the last of the energy of the obelisk to make sure they died on their own terms. Whether this was true or a fabrication to immortalize a foe that would have been far less dramatic dying from a shotgun to the face, we will never truly know. But this shift of power would cause panic in the Advent and Elders ranks. Riding high off their victory over the first Chosen, Xcom headed into a mission to collect resources from a downed alien ship. The resistant factions were getting stronger and made many great strides in this time. Little did they know how problematic this mission would become. We have to acknowledge knockoff Dante here. He was part of this mission, but with the hair being recorded as incorrect, it is safe to assume that this was a code name, and details of what this actual person looked like is lost. Around this time, the Shadow Chamber was in full research mode, and with a chance to move it forward, Xcom brought back an old friend.
Come get some.
This caused a significant discovery to be made. A new foe, one of truly dangerous proportions, an avatar. While not the final stage of the Avatar project, as the name would suggest, this creature could hold the will and the consciousness of an actual elder within. Of course, having a leader of the aliens make an appearance made XCOM's forces turn their weapons on the new creature very fast. No one knew if killing it would harm the psychic ghost possessing it. But like all science, the fun was in the discovery and the firepower.
I am the victor.
But the Elder's ghost must have alerted another being to arrive. Whether through misfortune or a planned introduction, a second new force made their presence known. The Warlock was the final of the Chosen, and perhaps the most troublesome. Feverish in its devotion to the Elders as the new gods of this world, it had been rewarded in its devotion with being given psi powers and the ability to resist multiple uses of the Necronomicon at the same time. This led XCOM to deal with not only the forces, but also a force of potentially explosive deadites. An army of darkness, if you will. Not only could it summon the dead, the Warlock had many other dangerous tools in its belt. Possession, teleporting, putting agents into stasis. The worst part was while the deadites were out, he could concentrate to stop himself taking damage. Truly, this monster was a force to be reckoned with. It took all their might and some incredibly risky moves. But in the end, XCOM managed to pull a victory. Just barely. The XCOM initiative would lick their wounds, start working on psi-based technology, and return to the fight in due course. In the meantime, there was another Chosen that could be taken down. Before that, a routine resistance order would unfortunately cause the loss of another lesser used agent, the Black Power Ranger. All that is known about this operation is that the note said that he fought valiantly, but nobly sacrificed himself so his teammates could escape. Truly, if there was ever an unsung hero of the war, it was he. After the war, Alpha, with a newly revived, if a bit broken Zordon, would put back together the command center with a special statue dedicated to this unknown hero with the mask. Had the Megazord survived the invasion, it would never have been the same. The thing noted most about the Hunter is that of all the battles that would take place in the War for Earth, the Hunters was the only one that the squad agreed that they had felt entirely unprepared for. An almost identical team to the Assassin was chosen for this Chosen, with the exception of bringing Yukari Takeba in the place of Lara Croft, reasoning that if the enemy had a sniper, it made sense to go in with someone who could work at equally long range. Also, bringing a Gauss cannon seemed like it would be more effective than a normal sniper that Lara was still using. It goes a long way into explaining the feeling of being overpowered when one of the first recorded kills was from a pistol. Whereas the layout of the base was different, the objective was exactly the same. The maze-like hallways felt familiar to XCOM at this point. They were well-oiled machines. Not a single alien stood a chance against the Force. Likely part of this was that by this time, XCOM had already experienced the worst the Chosen could throw at them, or at least they believed they had experienced the worst. The notes of this mission are written as though the people at no point considered anything could go wrong. Even when Eggman was injured heavily at the start, the forces had remembered to bring enough healing that it barely mattered. It helped that by this point, most of the units had long since gotten used to their superior technology. Akiyama was a master of his plasma shotgun. Between sword and shotgun, he was more devastating than the old ones were to the cats during the Great Rewriting. The most interesting thing to note is the recordings taken of the Hunter as his facility was being rearranged, making the admission that his goal had never been the Elder's mission.
I should probably start going on and on now about how I will defeat you for the glory of the Elders. But let's be real, I just like to kill things.
There was a general sentiment through the units of this mission that it was quite relieving not to have to consider morals, and instead enjoy letting the Hunter become the hunted. In the Obelisk room, whereas the layout did change, it is noted as being extremely familiar. Maybe the familiarity of the Assassin stronghold was what made the fight so easy. Perhaps it was the childish nature of the Hunter. Perhaps it was the fact that he could be shot in Overwatch by a shotgun.
Now I'm getting a little angry.
Who could say? Regardless, the notes do not claim that this mission was a long or dangerous one, only that for saying this creature had a sniper, he was fairly awful at keeping his distance. With two Chosen down, only the Warlock remained. Although the main force didn't have much in common, it is told through old files, and the fanfictions such files created, how the forces developed bonds. Some made sense. The Rangers all developed a closeness that reminded them of their time in Angel Grove, a time before the harshness of the world and Zordon's destruction caught up with them. Other bonds made less sense until you looked into the Warriors' past. With one being silent and the other never shutting up, you would assume little to connect Dr. Eggman and Gordon Freeman. However, records would speak of the quick bond that formed between the two. It only takes one connection to bring two people together. And both of these doctors were masters of convoluted and dangerous science. The records tell us of their escapades in their free time, developing new and more dangerous science. Indeed, with one being the embodiment of creating anything, and the other willing to test such creations. It has been noted by Dr. Teigen that during their tenures on board the Xcom jet, they were a source of many headaches and late-night emergency cleaning operations. Such bonds were fundamental to life aboard the carrier. Giving your trust into your fellow man was something that separated us from the aliens. Unfortunately, those same bonds could lead to problems in the field. It didn't take long before XCOM decided to end the last of the greatest threat of the final Chosen once and for all. The mission would be headed up by Akiyama, Snake, the Dreadnought, Lara, Eggman, and his best friend, Gordon Freeman. While setting up a surprise attack, the surprise was sprung a little too early.
Keep firing!
With the beginning of the operation off to a rocky start, it should have been a note that this Chosen outpost would be a different encounter. Outnumbered, outgunned, and instantly surrounded, XCOM was in their element. The aliens felt like anything left on a table when cats still existed. Once the initial conflict was completed, XCOM had but a moment to breathe and collect themselves but according to the report, it was ruined by the fanaticism of the most devout of the Chosen.
To think, I once considered myself a part of your race. You seem so small, so narrow of purpose. You do not deserve the Elder's attentions.
It was a few rooms and a few more ambushes when the great tragedy struck. Eggman had charged into the room, only to alert far too many Advent for him to take alone. In desperation, he tried to shut down the mech, but ended up supercharging the monster. As everyone charged in to help, Advent did their best to destroy the scientist, one of their oldest and greatest enemies, trapping him in stasis. But as Eggman was trapped, his friends protecting him, the forces of the aliens, determined to cause as much mental damage as possible, rushed on his closest ally, ending the life of Gordon Freeman in a moment that would be described as fast and ruthless. Eggman, unable to save his friend, who had rushed in to save him, was never the same. His need to create the perfect machine to destroy anything Advent would create would become an obsession that would be described as a dangerous coping mechanism. His thirst for blood of the Warlock would be noted by his surviving comrade. It is noted that with the death of Gordon Freeman, a voice from the void would call out. Whether it was in loss of a tool or loss of a lover was heavily debated. The battle to the Warlock, mired by the loss of a comrade, was a dangerous fight. Zombies, psi-holds, and reinforcements. Even the Elders came to lend a hand, using avatars to fight Xcom. But in their need to get revenge for the great Resistance member and friend Gordon Freeman, the forces whittled down the reinforcements, destroyed the wall, and whereas Eggman gained catharsis, being the one to originally fell this Warlock, it would be Snake to end the foe once and for all.
I will always they're moving to flank.
They're flanking my position!
Impossible! The Elders! They are silent! Demons!
With the Chosen destroyed, Xcom's resources abundant, and hope building, the Resistance could finally look towards uncovering the truth of the Avatar project. The first location to look for was the coordinates that the Codex had left for them, along with the nightmare for the janitor to deal with. The mission into the facility wasn't much in the report, only noting that Eggman had not learned his lesson about hacking. The final and most dangerous of alien technology, the Sectopod was unleashed in the later stages of the war as a last-ditch effort of Advent. Boasting incredible firepower, armor-piercing rounds, and the ability to become a kaiju at a moment's notice, it is lucky that the plasma rifles were so effective against it. It is fairly safe to say that this creature is probably a time anomaly. It's built on the concept of the Dreadnought, using a broken or dying sectoid to power it. This means that had the Dreadnought not come back to save us, we likely would not have to deal with this demonic machine, and historical scholars to this day use that as a point of contention on if the Dreadnought was beneficial to humanity or not. Thankfully, the psionic powers that gave it life were required to sustain it and keep it from the warp, and as such, it was not able to raise the dead like it could when it wasn't inside the machine. It would become the most important target to take down the moment it was seen, and in time would cause a devastating blow to Xcom itself. Still, with advanced technology and even harnessing the Chosen's own weaponry, the forces outside the facility were no match for the humans. Even when a surprise ambush brought Akiyama to his knees, it didn't take much for Xcom to get him back on his feet. Arriving at the facilities, hoping that they might find some pre-Gu humans, the Xcom forces were instead interested to find that this was the place where Advent were manufactured. It had been a question where these human-alien hybrids had come from. Interrogations led to the understanding that Advent troops themselves had no idea. There were long-running debates from Xcom and the Resistance factions about it, ranging from the bird and alien bees theory to the more worrying facehugger proposals. It led to a lot of headaches from the Skirmisher faction, as their existence was put into question in new and preposterous ways. Surprisingly, the theory that everyone passed on was the Cabbage Patch theory, as no one could work out where the seed might come from to grow. In hindsight, with Advent mulching our DNA, it was most feasible to assume they were splicing our genes together. This facility answered many questions. In short, they were using a host, much in the same way they had used the Commander in the darker days of the war as a template. This meant that a lot of genes that would come from Advent were identical, which is probably why the aliens had put forward a no romantic entanglements doctrine. Of course, there is a noted instance in the Advent's files of a narcissist being used as a template in the early introduction of Advent. The one incident is the main reason that romantic interests were banned, and cameras were installed to stop any evening gatherings from getting out of hand. The Gary incident is still actually ongoing, as no other human dares enter that quarantine zone. Still, with the extraction successful, this was one more version of Advent troops they wouldn't need to worry about again. After the events with the Warlock, Xcom felt the need to invest in a Psi warrior. Looking far and wide, it was only when they ended up in a destroyed village that was hidden off the map that they found the perfect candidate. Hailing from what he would call the village hidden in the leaf, Sasuke Uchiha was one of the candidates that seemed to hold the key to Psi powers, even before the aliens came. It is probably this reason that the village, also known as Konoha, was destroyed. Sasuke himself was quite a reserved character, agreeing to join Xcom in a quest to become stronger. Although the psychiatrist would struggle to get him to open up as to why he would require the power, it was apparently in a journey to defeat his older brother. Since the invasion, there has been no mention of anyone who matched the description Sasuke gave Xcom. Although, when dealing with ninjas, it could go either way as to whether his brother was dead or just really good at his job. Sasuke had been away training when the attack on Konoha came. Although he deployed late into the war effort, with all the powers Xcom had given him, few could face up to the might of Sasuke Uchiha. The next mission would be crucial to the final operation. Pinpointed from the coordinates from the Codex brain, Operation Foolish Bell would ring in the endgame for Xcom. The battle started hot and refused to calm down the entire time. Whatever Advent was guarding, they put a lot of resources into doing so. Still, with the firepower, the skill, and the dangerous power of chakra on their side, nothing could hold against the overwhelming might of a resistance that had fought all the odds and come out on the other side. Arriving at the target coordinates, Xcom found themselves facing against something they had never seen before: a portal. Through it, Advent's forces poured. The troops would easily clear out anything that got in their way and secure the site, of course. The asset was far too important to do anything but. Not even the being known as the Orb could do more than convenience the best that Xcom had to offer. Plugging the mystery portal into the ship was either an act of brilliance or stupidity, which was also the motive for a lot of Xcom's hiring. It is noted that in the reports, although they had tried to send test subjects through, they were all unsuccessful as a key was missing. Unfortunately, the only recorded instance of this is with Dr. Chen's gremlin. The rest we knew due to people suddenly disappearing from the Resistance, and emails stating their worries about being chosen next.
The aliens' seat of power, if you will, secure beyond any physical limitations.
Only one way to find out. Go on. We're counting on you.
But with the portal installed, it gave the Shadow Chamber the extra processing power to look over the avatar that they had captured a while back. For the Elders, the vessel was the key they needed to enter the portal, but only if the subject was alive. The vessel was also the reason for the Avatar project in its entirety. A place to hold the mind of the Elders, who were dying from an unknown disease. Like all diseases that weren't given a designation, it had a 100% mortality rate. Human genes were the missing part of the puzzle to keep themselves alive, allowing the Elders' reign of terror to continue through space for the rest of time. This was also why Advent had been gooing all the resonance of Earth, and the finale of the Avatar project spelled green, slimy doom for all of humanity. They would need someone to pilot the mech suit and meat suit, in the same way the Elders did. Of course, none were going to volunteer for that, and few could survive the transfer process. Few, except for the commander, who had so little thoughts going through their head, it wouldn't take up much room in the mech in the slightest. Well, they claim it was because the commander had been put through similar experiences when he was captured. But looking over all possible data, it is clear that the commander was someone who didn't think too hard and played snakes and ladders while everyone else was playing chess. Maybe in that simplicity was why the war went the way it did. So the plan was set, using Avatar's Sword Art Online technology, to jump through the portal, to wipe out the Elders, and return Earth to the rightful rulers. Of course, this grand plan was missing one important element: a distraction. It would need to be big, otherwise the aliens would all return through the portal and Xcom would be pincered. So a final operation was to be launched before the big battle. Xcom would harness the ultimate power that they had yet to utilize. They would conquer television. All sorts of plans came about, from creating their own sitcom with the Special Task Force codenamed Friends, to making a podcast of all the things that Advent does. In the end, though, time was on their side. Or it should be said, Advent had miscalculated. Rumours of Xcom activity had reached the general population's ears, and the speaker was set to calm the masses, while also accelerating the Avatar project into its final stages. This was in part due to Xcom beginning to get the upper hand, and so the Avatar project needed to be sped up. But also, the speaker had proposed a donathon to raise money for the aliens, as the war had pretty much bankrupted them at this point. This was warned by the leader of the Shadow Government, who had been the source of Xcom supplies and intel on the attacks. No one ever found out the identity of this man, nor why he never paid his lighting bill. From the silhouette we have seen in records, we can only assume it to be Agent 47 or Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
I ask one more thing of you. Take what you have learned. Let the world know what is happening here. Wake them up. Broadcast the truth. Before there is no one left to listen. It seems we are both out of time. Farewell, Commander.
With the death of the Shadow Government leader, who died to give us this final intel, we can cross The Rock off the list of suspects, as his contracts did not allow him to lose fights. A small team would lead the assault on the TV studio. Only the sneakiest of operatives, Snake, Akiyama, the Pink Power Ranger for healing sport, and the Dreadnought. Now see, this is one of those times I have to disagree with a mission report. I get the humans, but taking a walking super tank on a stealth mission seems like it would be like bringing an air horn to a funeral. And yet, if the mission logs are to be believed, it was Akiyama that was spotted first, who was standing next to the Dreadnought. In fact, according to the reports, the Dreadnought was apparently the last of the operatives to be spotted. Stealth, as I'm sure you can guess, lasted 20 seconds at most. Still, going in hard is something the A-Team always did best. The aliens had not anticipated this attack and were woefully unprepared for the overwhelming firepower that stormed the TV tower.
For 20 years, we have put our trust in Advent, in the Elders, because we believed a better future is possible for all. Today, that trust, that belief, has been rewarded. Advent peacekeeping forces are traveling across the world, carrying the greatest gift from the Elder. A revolutionary gene therapy, yes, but so much more. This is an end to disease, to decay, to pain. The beginnings of a new tomorrow, available to all of us today. Truly, humanity finally takes its rightful place amongst the stars.
And with that, there were no more splinter factions. It was humanity versus the alien menace. The aliens completely blindsided, apparently never seeing English football fans when their squad is winning. Hooliganism took over the world that night, leaving Advent scrambling to keep the peace. It was the perfect distraction for Xcom to launch their final assault. It all came down to this: the commander strapped into an avatar, and the A-Team, consisting of Akiyama, Eggman, the Pink Power Ranger, the Dreadnought, Snake, and Yukari Takaba. In all truth, leaving the entire war in the hands of 6 people was dangerous, but with the limitation of the Avatar and the fact that the others would need to defend the Avenger, there wasn't much Xcom could do. They sent the best of the best in, and only time would tell if everyone would make it home. If Xcom were hoping for a stealthy entry, that was ripped away the moment they entered. Logs state that the Elders began by taunting them and sending a welcoming force. But the thing about sending the best is that they are the ones who do the most damage. Advent will use the military tactic known as the Zap Brannigan method. However, where Advent relied on quantity, Xcom had the quality. It didn't matter that they were outgunned. The Ace team matched the enemies blow for blow. Alas, around the Family Guy holding cells, Xcom began to feel the weight of constant fighting. Even with the commander using his new psychic powers to turn foe to fodder, there were just too many to fight quickly enough to get to the chambers. Battered and worn down, it was then Advent sent their final and biggest obstacle: 2 Sectopods. They concentrated their fire on the reason for their creation, the Dreadnought, and with his shields broken and plating cracking, it was an explosion from a mech that would cause the end of the Emperor's great war machine. It is also why we have no idea if this machine truly existed from the year 40,000. Reports say that his final words, and truly his first words, confusing the team around him, were about how in death he still served, which was confusing since he was dead and no longer serving anything. Enraged by the loss of their friend and using the fires burning in their hearts to renew their vigor, the forces redoubled their efforts, pushing with all their might into the Ethereal's chambers. The Ethereals, dying as they were, used the forces of Advent and their own avatars to try and crush Xcom. The battle was extremely grueling. With so many gates, the troops quickly had to deal with being overwhelmed, along with facing psionic elders that in all truth, Xcom were ill-equipped to deal with, bringing healing instead of defense. Still, the avatars had one weakness which would spell their downfall. Whenever they would get hit by anything, they would activate the Hollyhock drive. This would allow them to teleport, but as the AI who had programmed it had suffered from major malfunctions, it could not choose where it would be teleported. The first avatar was taken down by a poor hop straight into the middle of Xcom's forces. At this time, the mission had gone on twice as long as any prior, and with 2 avatars still to destroy, it seemed like it would continue for a while longer. But with every turn, new foes were appearing, even with the commander's mind control ability. Things were beginning to look bleak for the group. Although Eggman managed to quickly dispatch the second avatar, a lot of the force's positions became compromised by a codex, causing most of the team to move further up. This would prove fatal to Yukari, who managed to get ambushed by a codex and the avatar, only for a mech barrage to finally destroy one of the victors of the Midnight Hour. Thankfully, in the Avatar's attack, a feedback loop of damage was activated, leaving it very weak. In an act people would later deem reckless, surrounded by Mudmen, Eggman and the Pink Power Ranger would make their final play. Miscalculating, Eggman left the Avatar with barely a hit point left. In the frenzy, the Avatar would overwhelm Eggman's mind by using the memories of Gordon, his old friend, against him, and horrifically tried to turn him against his own friends in an evil, twisted attempt to preserve its own life. To wrest control of his body away from him, some historians argue that this is at least part of the reason that after the war, Eggman would try to build a robotic empire. It is said that the Death Egg plans looked worryingly similar to an Elder's space weapon that never got built. Thankfully, he was stopped long before any machinations could come to fruition. This left Akiyama, Snake, and the Pink Ranger the only people left to save the world. Surrounded, but not without hope, the Pink Ranger sent healing to her teammates, hoping they could bring an end to the battle that she was not near enough to fight, sacrificing any chance of survival should the aliens get another chance to attack. With this small amount of adrenaline, Snake did the only thing he could do. He pulled out his rocket launcher, prayed to the great god Kojima for assistance, and with one rocket to the face, the final avatar went down. The aliens were taken aback, giving Xcom the perfect moment to escape.
Much longer.
We will reclaim what was given. We will be whole once more. Now. Your victory here means the end for all others. It will follow you as it followed us. You are not ready. We must not fail.
No one knows what the aliens meant in their final message. Maybe it might have made sense at the time. But Earth moved on. Forever changed, rebuilding would need to take place. The aliens, for better or for worse, would need a place to settle now that they were homeless and masterless. Advent would become free as well. leading to a problematic lack of genes in the gene pool for their race to work with. And the commander? Well, he would take a long-needed relaxing trip to the beach to actually relax for the first time in nearly 20 years. Being a historian, I follow the old ways of signing off. So please show your faith to the great algorithm god by pressing the like button. And if you wish to abet his anger for whatever the old humans thought that did, press the subscribe button. Herein lies my thesis on the ancient alien war. If you want to comment on any parts you might agree or disagree with, please leave them in the comments and be sure to study well, as this will all be on the test. This is the XCOM Historian, signing off.